Yippee-Ki-Yay, Mr. Falcon.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we have a special episode. TJ is going to be presenting a thesis about a film that's going to go down as an American classic with the likes of Deer Hunter and, Dr. Strangelove. We're going to be
pretty high company.
We're going to be talking about Bloodsport from 1988. And this is kind of your thing, Tej. So you wanna just briefly state you wanna run down your thesis statement here?
All right. Okay. So this really is about examining the cultural significance of a movie that until recently I thought was just like a throwaway, just goofy martial arts movie that I liked a lot more than I probably should, just because I'd seen it a whole bunch. It was one of those movies we had on tape, and like I knew we loved it in spite of all of its flaws, and there are many. But when you take a look at how this movie got made, what came out of it, and then the revelations that came later, it's kind of a stunning story that I think deserves a bit of attention, and we're gonna talk about it. So
it's interesting because I thought pretty much everyone who liked this movie was on a nostalgia trip, because I thought that was the only way you could like this goofy ass movie. But I didn't know it had such a deep and interesting backstory.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to know about how it got made, where the story comes from, and then like even more importantly, I think is like what comes after Bloodsport and the things that it inspires in its wake, and then the fact that it was all a bunch of BS. But we'll get to that.
All right. Well, just so the listeners know, currently in the Northeast, we're being treated to the completely normal experience of 60 degrees in the middle of January and like a nor'easter ripping through with hurricane-forced winds lashing water at everything and blowing shit all over the place. So if you hear some weird noise in the background, that's what it is from one of our mics. Because it's fucking blowing out there.
It's howling.
60 fucking degrees in the middle of January.
Hey, listen, man, if it were any colder, it'd be 10 feet of snow. So I'm
okay
I'm
with
fine
that, man. Snow doesn't flood things until it melts. It unnerves me, man. It unnerves me because it's an unnatural thing, and I don't like it. I always talk about our generation getting to experience like the death of so many things that are traditional and constants. We thought, and we've seen the death of northeastern winters. Like,
yeah,
it hasn't snowed in 2 years, man.
Yeah, a couple really mild winters.
We have to start reevaluating how we can think about our seasons.
Yeah,
but anyway, let's go back to 1988 for a while. Now, for people who may not have been exposed to this cinematic gem, do you want to just run down real quick?
Yeah.
Just a basic story before we get into the weeds here, and I mean, I guess the biggest thing that the casual film goer would know about this is that it's one of Jean-Claude Van Damme's first movies. It's not his first one, right? But it's like the first one that made a lot of noise.
It's early.
And got him noticed.
It's early.
He's super young.
But it was the thing that broke him into the mainstream, because it was real popular, and like you say, it came out in 1988, and it's the story of a guy named Frank Dux who enters an illegal underground full contact fighting tournament called the Kumite, which is supposedly like just totally shady, illegal, held every 5 years by some ancient ninja clan called the Black Dragon to test the skill of its fighters, and then eventually it goes to like a worldwide format where they invite fighters from all over. And the representative for one of the representatives for the United States and the West is a guy named Frank Dux, who's a military officer and expert fighter, and that's the character played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, and he's supposedly been trained by a guy named Senzo Tiger Tanaka, someone who's 40th generation Japanese ninjutsu master. And they call
Sounds
it
like something out of a Tarantino movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, pretty much. But he is the shidoshi, which is like the term for grandmaster, and supposedly trains Frank Dux. And the crazy part about all of this is that it's supposedly based on a true story. There really is a guy named Frank Dux who was really in the military.
It's Dukes. It's D-U-X.
Yes.
So it's like a French Dukes.
Yes.
So that's how they explain Jean-Claude's, I think he had to learn his lines phonetically still at this point, right? Because he didn't know English yet.
Oh, yeah. Like, he's just basically making sounds that people told him to make.
Yeah, that accent thick, man.
Yeah.
That accent's that's some serious shit there in this one. And it doesn't get much better through his career. Okay. So this sounds familiar, this setup.
It does.
I feel like I'm smelling like an arcade.
Well, it's
when I think about this.
It's cool because, and I don't think that it's not explicitly inspired by this, or nobody says that it is, but the format takes a lot from something that came out in 1987, which was the first Street Fighter game. And the Street Fighter the first one was awful. But that franchise got hugly popular,
Sure.
But
yeah, it's one of the biggest fighting games of all time, right?
Yeah, pretty much. There's one other we got to talk about, and we're getting there. But Street Fighter, it sounds like the inspiration for that world tournament format, And I don't know. Nobody says that that's where it came from, but it does sound a lot like that. But yeah, this whole thing is supposedly based on a true story.
It was the 80s. You could still get away with borrowing from all kinds of shit, including real life, and not giving any credit to it. And, every once in a while it got called out, but it wasn't with the immediacy that it is today with Twitter and with the internet, rather.
You get a cease and desist order.
Yeah. People could get away with shit and get sued 2 years later after the movie made millions and millions of dollars or whatever.
Right.
But loosely inspired by, and it sounds like what else? Sounds like Mortal Kombat too.
Well, yeah. So that's
we're gonna get there.
Thing.
All right. Am I fucking up your shit?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay. All right. Well, take it away. All right. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking can people understand this, or do they need to know more about the plot?
Well, I don't think there's really much more to know about the plot. I mean, it's number one, watch it with a grain of salt because it's a goofy movie, but the main thing, it does what it sets out to do, which is to just give you a fighting movie. There's not much in the way of acting or plot, but the fights, in spots they're goofy, but they're really entertaining, and you get this.
Yeah, because once they get to the tournament, it's pretty much just all about the tournament and the drama within the tournament. There's a little bit more because the U.S. government is hunting him down because technically he's AWOL, right?
Yeah.
Or he's on leave, but he wasn't supposed to go to. Where does this? Is this in Bangkok? Where does this take place?
It takes place in Hong Kong. In real life, the Kumite allegedly took place in the Bahamas, but for the movie, they moved it to Hong Kong, and technically Frank Dux he's supposed to be on furlough, and he's not supposed to leave the country, but he does.
Yeah, okay. All right. And then there's another American. There's the guy from Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, Donald
is
Gibb.
in there. So yeah, this thing is set up just like fighting games are, as far as story goes, which is hilarious. There's about as much story as there is in a fighting game. So there's this round in the beginning where we visit all the fighters as they like either are inspired to or decide to leave and sign up for this tournament, or they get their invite, right?
Well, yeah, some of them they all get an invite, but
yeah, like Mortal Kombat.
This movie, like everything falls into one of two buckets. It's like fighting and training montages, and they're both awesome. The whole first
a lot
half
of slow motion, tons of slow motion.
Oh yeah, the first quarter of the movie is just like people like training and fighting and sparring in their hometown or home country, and it's got this awesome soundtrack, and it just works. You know, if you're watching it with, you know, with that expectation that it ain't Shakespeare.
It's total cheese. Yeah, like it's 80s cheese, like to the max, man. It's goofy as shit in places too. Especially the editing in the beginning is fucking questionable in a couple spots, man. Like we meet the main character, we meet Van Damme, and then, you know, all of a sudden we're experiencing his childhood through a series of flashbacks that are also training montages.
Yeah.
But then we're like, there's some weird, that part where he's getting stretched like a wishbone, on that rack with the ropes.
He's being like drawn and quartered, essentially.
It was kind of weird. It seemed a little BDSM-y.
Well, you know, Dave, that comes back to help him. You know,
maybe that's me.
It all comes back in the final fight.
And for kids who don't know, Van Damme was super famous for his intense splits, which also resulted in some really high-waisted pants outfits over the years. My man wore some weird shit in his early movies, but that's like we could do a whole thing about that.
They're like Lon Chaney pants.
Yeah, dude. And like those baggy gym pants just jacked all the way fuck up with like a man leotard underneath. There's some weird ensembles. But like Chuck Norris, he needed to be able to, you know, he had to kick, man. He had to kick.
He had to kick. Just bread and butter.
Right. So then, after we meet the fighters and they all start making their way to the tournament, a few of them loosely become friends, like the two Americans, quote-unquote Americans, so Dux and the guy from Revenge of the Nerds. I'm not looking his name up. I'm just calling him that.
The actor's Donald Gibb, and his character's called Ray Jackson.
Ray Jackson.
Yeah.
That couldn't be more fucking American.
He has the best introduction, too. He's like hitting on some...
Yeah, he's awesome.
Some Chinese woman on a bus. He's like, "Hey, babe, want to go out with a real big man?" It's the most ham-handed gnarly line ever.
Yeah, man. I mean, if he had just like gotten his teeth fixed at some point, he would have been so much more pleasant to look at. In my head, I always get fucked up, and I think he's Tex Cobb.
Right. Yeah.
I always go to watch this and
vibes.
expect it to be. Yeah, I expect it to be Tex Cobb, and it's not, and I'm disappointed every time. And then once they get to the tournament, they just start fighting, and the pairing ups cause drama a little bit amongst the fighters. There's an antagonist that develops, and that's kind of it until it ends in the final match, as you would expect. So that's it in a nutshell. So, what's the story behind the movie, behind the screen?
Behind the screen, yeah. So all of this can be traced back to the real Frank Dux, who was an American. I think he was born in Canada and he moved to California, but he was a martial artist who started doing interviews with like Black Belt magazine and other martial arts publications at the time. This is in the 80s. And he's telling these wild stories about how he was the first Westerner to win this kumite, which is like it's an old term for like a test of skill in karate. And like a traditional kumite has one guy facing off against opponent after opponent after opponent. And like you go for as many rounds as you can. And you don't necessarily beat the guy, but you have to just like survive the round. And
traditionally, it's supposed to strictly be karate.
Yeah, it's a karate test, but they use that term very loosely, here, and
Yeah, in this movie, everyone kind of has their own fighting style, right? A little bit.
Well, yeah, you get people from all over, and that's where like the Street Fighter comparisons come in, because that came first, and you get Frank Dux. He technically uses like a form of ninjutsu, like nerve strikes and chi meditation and stuff like that. You got a Muay Thai guy, with like lots of elbows and knees and a very distinct style. There's a guy who I think is from either Africa or South America, and he has what I can only describe as like a monkey style. He's like down on all fours, bouncing around. They show him training in the beginning.
Oh, yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, he leaps onto a tree branch and like starts chopping coconuts in half with his hand.
That was a weird and mildly racist character.
Yeah,
it was strange.
It was, but we were all colorblind when we were watching it.
These are the kind of characters you find in a fighting game again, right?
Yeah, they're stereotypes.
They're weird. Yeah, exactly. Weird stereotypes. And there's always like a big giant like brute
there's
type of
There's
dude.
a sumo wrestler guy, a Japanese sumo wrestler who's just a monster. There's
you know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of Dead Alive. Remember we used to play that to death?
Dead or Alive, yeah.
Dead Alive, yeah. And they had the big biker dude.
Yeah, Bass.
I'll never remember his name. Bass.
That's who I played.
Yeah, you used to play him a lot, and I used to play who's the Russian guy I used to like?
Bayman.
With Bayman with the fins.
Yeah.
Had to play him with the fins. It gave him extra power.
Yes, yeah, the scuba gear.
God, I don't think we ever played that fucking sober, dude. But I mean that what was that in the early 2000s? So, all the way to then, that setup was still being used, and it's still being used in fighting games today. It's just the characters have changed, and yeah, that's kind of neat. That's kind of neat that this was just part of that. And people have to understand too, in the late 80s, martial arts, everything was huge. Like it was, Chuck, I guess it kind of started with Chuck Norris when he started doing stuff like movies for kids, when he stopped making like missing in action movies.
Delta Force.
And Delta Force and those cheap Canon action movies. And he really wanted to start making stuff that emphasizes, he did charity work, like a lot of charity stuff with youth. And he went I know he stopped doing action movies. He wouldn't use guns in movies anymore. And I think that kind of started it. And then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then there were just a whole shit ton of martial arts movies in the late 80s and early 90s. It was just culturally, it was just a thing. It was huge. What was that? There was that kids movie, Three Ninjas.
Oh yeah,
Remember
Three
that
Ninjas
one?
was awesome.
Yeah, and its sequels, like we were the prime age for that, and for when the Turtles movie, the first one and the second one came out, that we were, what was that, 89 and like 92, I think?
It was right around that time.
And the cartoon was on the whole time, and before that, so it was like ninja, martial arts, karate. Like karate was the first wave. Everyone was super into karate, and that was when this came out,
Right.
Yeah, just for context, just for people who might not remember or who weren't there.
Yeah, so so a martial arts movie coming out at this time was nothing new, but I think and this was a goofy one. It had a lot of weird stuff happening, but the thing that thickens the plot is that it came from this real guy named Frank Dux who had this fantastic story to tell about winning this kumite, and people were like, "Oh, like that's incredible." And he started to shop the story around. It gets picked up. The Canon Group made it, who had they're not around anymore, but they had a bunch of crazy movies come out in the late 80s, and there's a whole legacy there to talk about. But this movie comes out, and it paves the way for a lot of stuff to come after, most notably Mortal Kombat. If you look at Frank Dux and how he's portrayed in the movie, and like what he's doing and what he looks like, it's Johnny Cage. Like the pants, the sash, it's literally him. And the crazy thing is that the guys that made Mortal Kombat, which was huge, Mortal Kombat blew up in a way that no other video game had before or since. It was insane. You know, like it came out in the arcades, and people played the crap out of it. Then it came out on console, and you had this crazy like viral marketing back in the day, where like if you had it on Super Nintendo, that was the lame one because the Sega version had the blood
Sega
code.
Genesis.
Yeah, you could put in the blood code and unlock the gore, and it was like a totally different
that was
game.
the first time people really saw that distinction, where Nintendo was kind of like for kids, you know, and Sega was paved the way for things like PlayStation as like a more adult, not adult, but just advanced console that would do. It was for teenagers. Like, you got the feeling it was for teenagers, you know? And, I mean, all the cool kids had a Sega Genesis by that time. Plus, it had really great sports games, too, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
But, that was the prime time, because that was the first time consoles at home could really handle a good handle a fighting game like that and have it be good.
Right.
You know? And I mean, arcade fighting games had been a thing for a while, but that couldn't translate to a home system until Sega Genesis, 16-bit Sega Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could bring it home, and you know you could play the clean version in front of your parents. You know, so this isn't that bad. But then you put in the blood code, and you're like pulling people's spines out and ripping hearts out, and it had all the fatalities, and you could
learn it like you couldn't learn an arcade game.
Yeah,
you know, you could learn every character's fatalities and beat the game with each character.
And they didn't tell you any of it. You had to go in and just like figure it out, and that was cool, because then when you got it, you're like, it felt like like you were in some kind of club. You were the only one that knew how to do this thing. You know, that was awesome. And
unless you knew someone who could teach you.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you go back to Bloodsport. How does this go back to, like, the guys that made Mortal Kombat, Ed Boon and John Tobias, I think their names are, were asked to make a video game adaptation of another Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. The studio wanted them to make Universal Soldier, the game. And they were, they pushed back and said, like, we want to make a fighting game, and there's this other Jean-Claude Van Damme movie that we want to base it on. It's called Bloodsport. And they were, like, in talks to secure the license, and Mortal Kombat was almost like Bloodsport, the video game. But the talks fell through. And so they're like, we still believe in this format, this game, and we still want to make it. So then they just kind of ran with it and changed a bunch of stuff so that it wasn't Bloodsport, because they couldn't use the name, but they were going to call it Kumite, which is central to the plot. But then, who really knows what a Kumite is? If you saw Bloodsport, you did, but that's not like a very common word that you would see that written and just know what that means. And, they eventually came around to the title of Mortal Kombat, and it was hard to copyright because it was kind of like two common words. It was commonly used, and so they just changed the C to the K to avoid any copyright issues. And boom, you have this smash hit that absolutely eclipses everything that could have been used as source material. Mortal Kombat was insane. It's still big today. They just had a game come out last year. It's like the 12th game in the series, I think. I
assume, too, if it had continued to be based on Bloodsport, that the supernatural elements that are in Mortal Kombat wouldn't be there, right?
Right, and
and that became the coolest part of the game.
And it's funny because that comes from another one of my favorite movies. If you look at the supernatural bits, like Shang Tsung the Sorcerer, and Raiden the Thunder God with the big straw hat and the demons. It's Big Trouble in Little China, all the way.
Yeah, Kurt Russell fights him. Yeah,
yeah. The big sumo guy. They borrowed a ton from that movie. And
look for Bloodsport and Giphy, and you'll find a GIF of that nut punch.
Yeah, man,
it's there. and you can just watch it over and over again in glorious slow motion.
Yeah. So
Okay. So
you have this huge cultural smash hit in Mortal Kombat that came from Bloodsport that is supposedly based on a true story, going back to this guy Frank Dux, right?
yeah. So he tells everyone this story, and he spins it into a Hollywood movie based on,
Yes,
without even writing a book or anything.
and I think
The dude must have been a hell of a salesman.
well, he eventually had some books come out that tell even crazier stories, but this is where things kind of start to get weird because you have this gigantic, cultural phenomenon, coming off of Mortal Kombat, which kind of flowed from Bloodsport, and I think it almost put like too much scrutiny on the source material of Frank Dux because then people start to look into it, and none of it adds up.
Well, again, to remind people, this was an underground fighting tournament, supposedly, and it was underground in the movie because it was extremely violent. Like, fighters died routinely. Fights to the death typically aren't allowed in most countries.
That's frowned upon.
And yeah, it's a little
like most murder,
morally questionable. Yeah, and I don't remember, is gambling like a big part of it too?
Oh yeah, there's people betting on the side, and
yeah, okay.
The third,
so yeah, this is
third bucket of things.
This isn't something.
Sorry, go ahead.
This isn't something that like people were going to read about in Martial Arts Magazine or whatever the hell that was around back then. So there was no way to know this guy's story didn't add up unless you dug, right?
Well, yeah, because here's the thing: like they would try to verify these things, and the more they'd ask him about it, and he's like, "Well, they're not going to tell you. It's illegal. It's underground for a reason." So it was all conveniently unverifiable. And so they ask for like pictures or footage, and it's like, well, no, there was no cameras allowed. There was no press allowed. They make a big deal about that in the movie that like he kind of starts talking to some hot reporter that wants to scoop on the Kumite, and they're like, the rules are there, no press, And so it winds up being a convenient way to not have to verify anything. And then he starts kind of giving names of people that were there and could verify it if only they were alive, And there are people, you could ask this guy, but he died. And then there's the idea that he was trained by someone, Senzo the Tiger Tanaka, who apparently is 40th generation, right? And they can't find any trace of this guy in history. No, like they can't find anything about Senzo Tanaka. The only place they can find the name Senzo Tanaka is an Ian Fleming novel. Like I think it was Tomorrow Never Dies, one of the more recent Bond movies.
It's from a James Bond book.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
wow.
Yeah, that's the only place they can find the name Senzo Tanaka. And so the more you dig into it, the more the story kind of falls apart. And it just keeps happening that way. And you go back, and then there are things like, well, what can you look into? You can look into Frank Dux's military record. There's a record of that, right? And when you look, he really was a Marine, but there's an asterisk there. He was in the Marine Reserves. And
yeah, it's a different thing.
Yeah, not the same. And he's like, well, I was given the Medal of Honor. And there's a picture of him in uniform, and they have no record of the Medal of Honor for him in his service records. And the picture of him where he's like posing with it, and it's number one, he's wearing a uniform, and they, how they have all that like those like military, what are the medals and stuff, like those colorful badges.
The
they
rack,
wear.
the ribbons, the rack of ribbons. Yeah,
yeah. There's a very specific order those things are supposed to go in. And I don't know how that works, but his are all wrong. And the Medal of Honor that he's wearing is not the one that they give to Marines. It's the one they give to Army personnel.
Yeah, it's if you don't know, they have the each branch of the service. I mean, the Navy doesn't typically award that medal, but they have. But it'll have the insignia of that branch. and the Army version has the Army insignia, the eagle, and the Marine Corps one has the Marine Corps insignia.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a big mistake. And also at the time, I'm assuming like whatever it was the early 80s or whatever, post-Vietnam. If he was in the Marine Corps Reserves, he probably almost certainly didn't go overseas.
There's nothing in his record that says he served overseas. But if you ask him, he says, "Oh yeah, I was in the Vietnam conflict." And then, but like a quick search of his record says he didn't enlist until after the Americans pulled out of Vietnam. And then he says, "Well, that's because I did all these covert ops, so they wouldn't be in the records anyway. Everything was off book."
He was doing secret squirrel stuff for the CIA, huh?
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. He says that he was approached by somebody in the CIA, and that's where all these crazy things come from. That these missions that he went on, where he had to blow up a fuel depot in Nicaragua, or go and destroy a chemical weapons plant in Iran. And they said, "Well, how can you verify any of this?" And he says, "Well, you can't. It's top secret, Then
why the fuck are you talking about it, bro?
Yeah, right.
and I mean, that shit does happen. Like, the CIA does do that shit, but they tend to, recruit special forces for that kind of shit.
Right.
Not a Marine Corps reservist in the States.
So for part of his evidence, he presents this picture of him, in military uniform, holding a firearm, and it looks like he's out in the field or something. He's out in some country doing some top secret mission. But you look at the gun he's got, and it's like a 22 squirrel gun, which no soldier would ever carry into combat. And a little further digging, the uniform he's got on is a costume. It's a picture from the set of another movie that was directed by the guy who wrote Bloodsport and hired Frank Dux to be in it.
No.
Yeah, so that picture he's showing people is a set photo from just another film project.
He couldn't even fucking set up an actual photo to back up his story.
No.
He just got a fucking... Wow, he's lazy too. Holy shit.
Every time someone questions him on it, not only does he say, well, you can't, verify it because of the nature of the thing. It winds up just turning into an even more fantastic and ridiculous yarn. It's like, well, I can't show you the thing from the Kumite because of this other crazy, ridiculous thing that I did. There's
yeah, it's misdirection. I mean, it sounds like it's just a typical con man.
He's all over the place
when you get down to it. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I don't know that there would be this much attention on it if the Bloodsport wasn't popular enough to inspire a video game that then went absolutely world-conquering global.
Yeah, because Bloodsport didn't purport itself to be like a documentary or whatever, but it has text that says, based on a true story, and there's text at the end of the movie, right, that says whatever Dukes went on to do this and that.
Right.
And that makes it all bullshit, at least, that aspect of it. It wouldn't be the first time a true story from Hollywood turned out to not be a true story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's happened before, but this, they literally, they use the guy's name, right? And they don't change it. And then
it's not a based on, name. They just did Frank
fucking
go
Dukes.
For it.
And then I think it says he had a professional record of 329 matches with no losses, undefeated, and 56 consecutive knockouts, which is insane. It's an impossibly perfect record. And, and so there's got to be something somewhere in the annals of all the fights that happened that would back this up. And there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing.
Man.
So, the thing people were asking for the most was video, right? And there's no video. Then somehow like 34 years after the fact, they're like, oh yeah, there's video. Here it is. And this video posts to some obscure YouTube channel. I think it was called like Samurai Life or something like that. And it's pictures of, or video of what appears to be a fighting tournament. The problem is, it looks like it was filmed in like sepia tone. It's
Good.
like it took place in 1980, but it looks like it was filmed in like 1930. And they appear to be real fights. The guy in it who's doing the fighting looks like it could be Frank Dux, and he looks competent. The guy looks like he can fight, but essentially, that's it. He's competent in that he can throw a kick, and he's not afraid to get punched in the face. And the guys that he's fighting and beating look like absolute chumps. They take one hit, and they're like, no, I'm done. And they just kind of like, you can see him waving the ref off because like I think it looks like they're taking their first punch in the face and just quitting.
So basically, it's like Steven Seagal, one of those Steven Seagal videos in the dojo.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. And then some guy comes forward and says, that's not Frank Dux. That's my dad. I forget the guy's name. It's like Cardio Ray or it begins with a C. I'd have to look back at it. But
I can tell because he was fucking terrible. So was that dude.
It's a Filipino fighter taking part in an event that was held in, I think, Taiwan. And it was like a fighting tournament, but it's just some other guy. And it looked enough like Frank Dux that people purport that it was doctored footage to pass him off as Frank Dux.
Yeah. Like none of that fucking adds up. I mean, think about it. You know, if you're that deep into the military and doing just if you're blowing up fuel depots and going on like secret missions for the CIA and shit, when are you training? Like that kind of martial arts expertise takes constant training to maintain. And when the hell is he fighting all those fights?
I don't know, man.
In that supposed record, like where did he find the time?
Well, here's the wrinkle though. Frank Dux can fight. The guy runs a dojo.
Okay.
The guy runs a dojo, and he's at the very least he's competent. He knows how to fight. There are people that have been in his classes and seen him do stuff and give lessons, and he does know how to fight.
He was on the set for Bloodsport, right?
Yeah, he was there.
Like he was there. So, and I mean,
He was a fight
Jean-Claude Van
choreographer.
Damme was and Van Damme was a karate champion in real life, right? Before he was an actor. So, I mean, he had to at least be good enough to fake everyone in the production out to thinking he knew his shit. Like he couldn't be a complete fraud.
No, he is a martial artist. That much is clear.
And I'm sure he wasn't the only real martial artist on that set. I'm sure there were several for all the choreography they had to do and just, to be the fighters, the no-name fighters that get their asses whooped.
Oh, yeah, there's a couple of them that are like peppered all over Jean-Claude Van Damme's movies. Like you'll see him in like a few of his movies, like Lionheart, I think is one of them that has like a couple of the same goons in it because they can't act, but they can fight.
So the real Dukes had to at least be good enough to fake everyone in the production out and then, carry on this lie. So, I mean, yeah, you wonder what parts are actually true,
Yeah, there's just enough like skill and ability to just cast doubt on, okay, well, maybe some of it's true. But even if some of it's true, it's very wildly different from what actually took place, if anything at all took place. And
now,
this,
I read this
doesn't
thing
hold up to scrutiny.
about him. I read this thing about him that he had his own style of martial arts.
Yeah, Dux Ryu.
Yeah, Dux Ryu Ninjutsu apparently is the full name. And the thing I read said it is also a complete fabrication. So basically, he just made up a fighting style to sell at his dojo.
Which you can do. People do it all the time.
Yeah, I assume it involves a lot of splits and nut punching. And, I mean, that's original. It's emulatable. it's
Don't do it in
was
a tournament. You'll get
cornerstone.
disqualified.
Will you? Is that against the rules
For a nut punch?
Even in an underground to the death tourney?
I don't know about that. Yeah, I guess it's
Okay.
no holds barred.
So, does knowing all this detract from your enjoyment? You said this is actually made you like the movie more, learning all this shit.
Yeah, it does. And because when I first heard it, you think, what? Bloodsport was bullshit? Because you get
This
that.
completely realistic movie was bullshit.
Well, I mean, because when you see based on a true story and they have like stats,
Yeah, for real.
like fastest knockout and fastest kick with a knockout, 72 miles per hour. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And then you learn that you've been lied to, and you get that initial, bit of disbelief, like, oh man, how could someone do that? But the more I think about it, and the more I think about what came after Bloodsport, especially like stuff like Mortal Kombat and the career of Jean-Claude Van Damme, who, like, let's be honest, I mean, he's not De Niro or anything, but I like his movies. They're entertaining. I was it made me like a karate movie guy. I like that stuff. And
Yeah.
if that movie doesn't get made, maybe we don't get Mortal Kombat. Maybe we don't get Time Cop, which was really cool, and any of the other stuff.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, Time Cop.
I remember that one.
It was goofy,
I mean,
movie, but it was awesome.
He made a lot of shit, but he had a few really fun movies in his early career, and he was one of the cornerstone action stars of that era. I mean, it wasn't just Arnold and Stallone making action movies. I mean, for better or for worse, Steven Seagal was part of it, and he kind of followed a similar Frank Dux-esque entry into Hollywood.
Well,
and
oddly
there's
enough,
a lot
Dave,
of doubt about his backstory. Oh, what?
So apparently, Frank Dux, one of the things that he says he was involved in was that he was on a mission, and the objective of that mission was to stop an assassination attempt on Steven Seagal. So, depending on what story you believe, Frank Dux saved us from the loss of Steven Seagal.
When Seagal was an actor?
I don't know. I mean, I know Seagal, maybe it had to do. Remember, you heard that story about Seagal becoming like an envoy to Russia?
Yeah. I didn't know how real any of that weirdness was. He got so strange and off the map for me. I just kind of stopped. I look at the memes and laugh, and that's about it. I mean, I've watched, I think, all of his, real movies. I haven't watched all the direct-to-video dog shit he's been putting out.
Oh, God, they're terrible.
Last many, many years. But, all those original ones I watched, I call them the 3-word title movies that he made.
Hard to
Above
Kill.
the Law, Hard to Kill, yeah. On Deadly Ground, and then Under Siege. Which was... It's weird. Like I always thought of that as the pinnacle of his career.
That's a good one.
And then it went right off a cliff after that. Yeah, it's good. But I worry that a lot of that is nostalgia because I rewatched it. I tried to rewatch it with like fresh eyes. It is a goofy fucking movie, like action movie. It's just like one of those like just action movies. It's not even close to being based in reality, which is fine. And Tommy Lee Jones is fantastic, and
he's great.
Erica Elenick is wonderful, and I'll watch that movie all the time.
Cake.
I even kind of like The Cake. I mean, it's a spiritual awakening for many folks our age, and the sequel I even kind of like.
Is that the one on the train?
Yes, the one in the dark territory, the one on the train. It has its moments. It's not nearly as good as the first one, but it's interesting. I'm a sucker for train movies, man. Unstoppable, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. I mean, I'll fuck with that, dude. So anyway,
we almost lost him, Dave, and Frank Dux gave him back to us.
So he also, by creating the fake story that led to Bloodsport, he not only propelled Seagal's career as an actor, but saved his life.
Shit, yeah.
Incredible. If that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have gotten Fire Down Below.
Right, with Levon Helm.
Holy shit! Wow, you know his catalog better than me.
Oh
That's
man, I've seen some Steven Seagal movies.
terrifying. My favorite,
the Glimmer Man,
the Glimmer Man with Damon Wayans. No, not Damon Wayans.
Keenan Ivory
Keenan
Wayans.
Ivory Wayans, the elder brother. Holy shit! That's where the credit card knife,
Yep.
the razor blade, and the credit card, and he like zips 3 dudes' throats and shit, just wasting motherfuckers in a parking garage.
With the power of Aikido.
His clothes in that were so fucking weird. That was the first time you saw him in his. I think he just wore his normal clothes in that when he's these crazy fucking jackets and beads and shit. That dude's had a fucking wacky career. Just
He really
the
has.
reality shows and just the movies he made and
The Rock Band.
why did they keep making him play an Italian when he was young? Did you notice that? Like in like 2 of his early movies, he's an Italian,
Yeah.
like a guinea from New York. I don't know. It seems weird now. Maybe it played then, but it seems weird now.
Well, he had the slick back jet black hair.
I guess. I mean, my favorite part of any of his movies is I always forget which movie it's in. I think it's Above the Law, but I'm not sure. But he wraps a cue ball in a handkerchief
Oh yeah, that's great.
and then just beats the piss out of like 4 dudes in the face with it. And like those over the top sound effects were great. And like I remember watching it as a kid. I thought I could hear the teeth just breaking when he smacked those dudes. And I grew up with a pool table in my basement, and fuck, man, I never thought about it
practice?
before. No, but I knew how heavy and hard they are, and I'm like, holy fuck, that would fucking hurt. That's a good idea. I'm
could
going
do
to
some
file
damage.
that away. I'm going to file that away, and then if I ever need it, grab a bar towel and a cue ball and get busy.
Yeah, if anybody breaks into your house and all of the other weapons you own are out of reach, you always have the cue ball.
There's always the cue ball, baby. No one will suspect it. So that's fun, man. That's interesting. That's interesting shit. And then if someone looks it up, they're going to find there's a whole bunch of other Bloodsport movies. I think there's 4 altogether. Those are just horrid nonsense, right?
Oh, I've never seen any of them.
I think I haven't either. Unless I did unintentionally and don't remember. But I looked it up, and it looks like Van Damme is in the second one. At least he's on the poster. I don't know. Maybe he's in a dream or something, or they used old footage and then just promoted it with him in it. I'm not sure, but I'm not really trying to watch it.
No, don't do it. The OG. Stick to the OG.
The OG. So where would you I know you're into samurai movies and martial arts movies way more than I am. It's one of those things that's just not my bag. Like I hate the Kill Bill movies, and I love Tarantino.
Oh, those are great.
With a passion. I've tried too, and I just don't I don't get the movies that they're an homage to, and I don't get those movies. I won't, and I don't think I ever will. I'm always willing to try something again, because movies are very different, I find, as you get older. So you really should rewatch things you didn't like or thought you didn't like. But where would you rank this in your like all-time martial arts film list?
Oh man,
Where is this? Is this? You don't have to give it a number, but is it like near the top?
it's high.
Okay.
And it's
okay.
it's weird too, because I think it has less to do with the quality of the movie, and again, more to do with the fact that I had access to it when I was a kid, and I've watched it 1,000 times. Because some of the other martial arts movies I've seen that I would put really high on my list, some of them were too violent for me to watch when I was young. But like this one was just, acceptable enough that I was allowed to watch it when I was at a young age, and I formed this like attachment to it. And not for nothing, man, I can pretty much like hear the whole movie. there's not a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of
I was gonna say
there's a lot of punches and kicks, but there's a kick-ass soundtrack. The score to that movie is cool, and this is gonna sound really weird, but that's kind of like my background noise movie when I'm doing something I have to pay attention to. Like I spend a lot of time working on guitars. You know, I'll go to clean them up and do a setup or like restore an old one that's been in someone's closet, and I'll put that on in the background because number one, like I don't even need to look at it to know what's happening, but it's just nice noise in the background with the music and all the training montages and everything.
Sure.
So it's
I have a few movies like that, man, for sure. I get it.
It's really high on my personal list as an objective opinion. The movie's garbage, but I love it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, and that's something really interesting and unique to us growing up. There were certain movies that you just watched a lot because they were in the house. You had them, and you liked them enough to. Like, would you have watched that movie if you had access to 1,000 movies at that age?
I don't think so. No,
probably not. No, but and it's a very I guess a simplistic story for a kid to understand. I mean, like you said, there's not a lot of dialogue.
It's a video game.
So, it's told through very simple actions and statements, and the drama within the fighting is very easy to understand. The bad guy looks like a bad guy. He's mean. He hurts Dukes' friend. Dukes goes to get revenge by beating his ass and also winning tournament. Like, it's very easy to get, and the slow motion shit at the end, dude. Like, I watched this movie as a comedy, and
it's really fun.
Like with a few drinks in you, and you like go into it ready to watch it as a comedy. By the end, when he's doing the slow motion screams with the giant wide open mouth because he gets the sand in his eyes, fucking gold. Like, it's just gold. I'll be rolling. And then just like all of it, the physicality is so weird. Like the way what's the bad guy's name?
Chong Li.
Yeah, the way he pumps up the crowd when he wins. Like the weird, just like he's like one of those wrestler action figures they made when we were kids. You squeeze the legs and the arms just go up and down, up and down.
Yeah,
he move with the elbow.
He does look like
he just does that through the whole movie. It freaks me out, man.
They had to dub his voice.
Did they?
Yeah, he does not sound like that in real life. Like they had to make him sound scarier. And when he looks at me, he goes, "You are next." That's someone else's voice. He's got a real goofy voice.
He was scary looking as a kid. I remember he freaked me out a little bit, and he's got a crazy build.
He's like a legendary martial arts guy named Bolo Young is the name of the actor. He was in He was one of the bad guys from the Bruce Lee movie Enter the Dragon.
Right.
He's one of the first guys that they put up against Bruce Lee in like that open air tournament thing that he's in front of before he's getting scratched up at the end. Yeah, he beats up Bolo Young,
man, with the facial expressions when in the fights and everything. Like, he really hams it up and sells it. And he's got those giant pecs and those huge shoulders. It looks weird on a martial artist. Like, you usually picture them more like more like Van Damme size, I guess.
Yeah, but, you need to be able to move.
Sinewy and light, but it also makes him scarier as a bad guy because he's kind of like the Ivan Drago, even though I'm sure the way they shot it made him look taller than he is because he's built like a short dude who puts on a lot of muscle. So I don't know. It worked. It worked, and it works for kids. And I get why it burrowed into your brain. I totally do.
It did.
What do you, in your head, do you think of fighting movies like this in the same category as boxing movies, or are they separate?
Separate.
Okay.
Totally different.
We're gonna take a deep dive into boxing movies that aren't Rocky in the near future. We're very excited about that one because we're both super into just boxing movies as a genre. And I don't know, I asked you that because I recently rewatched Warrior with Tom Hardy, and that's an MMA movie, but the drama in it plays more like a boxing film.
I could see that.
So I don't know. It's weird for me. It got me wondering where I would categorize it. But, because it's going to be hard for me not to bring that up in the boxing movie talk. Because in a lot of ways, I think it was an attempt to reinvent Rocky for MMA when MMA was really, really popular.
It still is. MMA is huge.
Not to say it isn't now, but, when it was really climbing, when it was in the zeitgeist and it was kind of fresh. I don't know. It's a neat movie that I think kind of flew under a lot of people's radar with a crazy cast that everyone should check out. And I guess everyone should check out Bloodsport. Just for the kicks. Like, if you're not into those kind of movies, just go in like me and think of it as a comedy. But if you're into 80s movies, it has everything.
Oh, yeah.
It has everything, the clothes, the music, and the weird filming locations too. It definitely has its own atmosphere because it was filmed in China.
Yeah, it was on location.
Right? And I think I read it was actually one of the only movies filmed in that famous walled city.
Yeah.
That has since been demolished. So, it's not like the backdrop is inauthentic. Like, you can forgive movies a lot if they are there, and getting real color for the background and stuff. Because you can't fake scenes like, on the boats. Those scenes on the boats when they're running around.
When the young Forrest Whitaker takes a dip.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something, too. That's funny, right? Out of nowhere, Forrest Whitaker is like the government agent hunting him down.
Yeah, but they're
that's
more
pretty
like
cool.
They're more like the Keystone Cops. They're like two idiots.
Yeah. Bumbling jackasses, and it's an excuse for Van Damme to, like, do pirouettes around various structures.
The goofiest chase scene ever filmed.
Yeah, I mean, he's French, so he's got to do some parkour, I guess. But it's just fun, man. I get it. It's fun.
If you
and
do
it's got
check
all
it
the
out,
stereotypes too. Go ahead.
If you do check it out, it's cool to keep in mind. You think, like, how did this get made? It's goofy as hell. And why would he lie about all that stuff? But if he hadn't, we wouldn't have this movie, which is at the very least entertaining, and all the stuff that came out of it. Like, I think the impact it had was way more than it deserved. It had this enormous impact when you consider everything that came after, and it all was just from this fantastic fabrication that, it's who would come up with that? But I mean, just look at the results. We have Mortal Kombat and Bloodsport and all the other imitators that those inspired. It's crazy.
Yeah, and the fact that it was so accessible to kids, not like little kids, but, a young audience really helped, I think, buoy the entire martial arts movie wave and everything that you could give everything that came after a little credit to Bloodsport, because it was a little bit more badass than most martial arts movies. It wasn't made as a kid's movie, so you felt like you were watching something cool. It made it kind of cool. It gave it another level of coolness that Three Ninjas just didn't have.
It was like knowing the blood code.
Knowing the blood code. Fuck yeah, dude. Fuck yeah. We should do something about Chuck Norris's movies too, because that's where it all started. And I remember those Chuck Norris action figures who chopped through fake blocks of wood and shit, and always wanting them because they were always on TV being pitched to me. And then I went back and started watching some of the movies he made for Canon, also for Canon. They were, I guess you could blame Canon, for starting the martial arts movie wave of the late 80s, because they gave Chuck Norris, God, he made so many movies with them. I think Lone Wolf McQuade was one of theirs.
Yeah.
All three missing in action movies. What didn't you mention one? What one did you just?
Delta Force.
Delta Force, right? And I think that had a sequel too. Like, Canon churned out not some great movies, but they churned out movies, dude.
Oh yeah,
they made a
tons.
lot. They contributed to the pop culture noise a lot in that era. And no one really talks about them as an entity because they just kind of died unceremoniously. But you see that old logo in front of a lot of cult classics.
Yeah, it's there. I'd seen it so many times, like I didn't really even notice it. And then somebody mentioned the Canon Group. I'm like, what the hell's the Canon Group? And then I saw the logo, and that's what. Oh yeah, every movie I watched when I was a kid had that logo in front of it.
Yeah, that and Carolco. Do you remember Carolco? Carolco. Yeah, it was the company that Mario Casar and Andrew Vajna started, and
maybe.
they made.
I bet if I saw the logo, I'd remember.
They were the producers of First Blood Part 2. I don't know if they produced the first one. I don't think they did, but they were the producers of the second and third one, and they made a ton of the action movies from the 80s and into the early 90s. Some really, really bad ones. But a lot of what Stallone did, a lot of what Bruce Willis, a few Bruce Willis vehicles, a couple things for Schwarzenegger, and then they started doing like lower tier shit. And like Charlie Sheen did a couple of their movies. Like they were the big explosions. Like they were like the Michael Bay movies of the day that they started making. And then they got into financial trouble and it all went to shit.
Yeah,
and
age-old story.
The movie started getting worse and worse with smaller and smaller budgets and shittier D-list stars, and then they went under. But at the time, and the cool thing was they played, when the logo came up in front of a movie, they played a little bar of music from the Rambo soundtrack, Rambo 2, the synth music.
I gotta find it now. I bet you I'd recognize it.
Yeah, seeing that logo, the Canon logo, and the old TriStar logo with the Pegasus running and turning into the logo, man, that shit just brings back memories of old movies.
Like Monster Squad.
Being a kid. Yeah, dude, Monster Squad. And the United Artists logo, the old United Artists logo, when it turned real slow, that's the logo that was in front of Rocky. That was always in front of the original Rocky. And I don't know, seeing that stuff brings back memories like an old song, sort of, because they're gone. Like, they all got updated, of course. You know, that's what, fucking 40, 35 years ago. It's funny. And I guess there's probably compilations on YouTube, right, of all those old intros.
There's gotta be.
I bet you they have them. Something blew my mind the other day. I know you said you didn't have HBO as a kid, right, in the house?
No.
Well, I grew up with it through an illegal cable box, and I watched. My dad taped a lot of stuff off HBO, so that meant a lot of those things had the HBO intro tacked on at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And somebody recently upgraded it to 4K and put it on YouTube. It's like the beginning of Beetlejuice and flying over the trees and everything. And it's just, you got to look it up, man. It's a kind of an introduction that you don't see anymore, that you can't really do with computers unless you're really trying on purpose to do something retro. And seeing it in 4K was kind of wild. And it's just such a, it uses miniatures, like it's so of the time. And for me, like, it brings back so many memories because that intro just preceded so many movies that I loved that were on tape, like Monster Squad. That I remember that being in front of Monster Squad,
the the TriStar.
No, the HBO intro, intro. And just hearing it somehow brings back memories of all those movies. But I guess more like just of watching movies, and it's one of those cool little nostalgic things that, it's kind of, it felt private until you find out all kinds of people have the same kind of feelings, and somebody even cared enough to upgrade the old HBO intro to 4K. And I remember HBO used to have a disclaimer in front of R-rated movies that said, HBO will show this feature only at night. So even HBO used to wait until late at night.
Send your kids to bed.
Yeah, send your kids to bed and watch Home Box Office. Yeah, that's what it stands for, kids. Home box
Home
office.
box office.
Yeah, it was a novel thing, man. All right, well, I guess that that kind of does it. Unless you have any more secrets about old Frankie Dux.
No, I mean like that guy. There's tons of more secrets, but I don't know if we have time for all of them. No one will ever get the full story on that guy.
Is there like a book about him?
He had a book.
If anyone cares,
he wrote a book called like with. I mean he probably had a writer working with him. It's called The Secret Man, and it's supposed to go through all his exploits as a CIA agent, being handled personally by General Norman Schwarzkopf himself.
oh, hell yeah,
Oh,
Storm
man.
and Norman.
I think I might
Why
read
not,
it.
right? Yeah, fuck it. Yeah, if you want to hear more of his crazy bullshit stories, there's a whole book. Okay, but nobody wrote a book about him being a con man yet.
I think there is one. There's got to be. I think somebody went in and did like a bunch of the research to say why none of that stuff would happen.
All right. Well, if you care, go forth and read, and don't watch the other Bloodsport movies.
No, stick to the
don't.
first one.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Falconers. Thank you, TJ.
My pleasure.
And thank you for enlightening us on the down and dirty behind the real Frank Dux.